9-year-old Joey was asked by his mother what he had learned in Sunday school. Well, Mom, our teacher told us how God sent Moses behind enemy lines. Is that better? Okay. I'm going to start all over. 9-year-old Joey was asked by his mother what he had learned in Sunday school that day. Well, Mom, our teacher told us how God sent Moses behind enemy lines on a mission to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. When he got to the Red Sea, he had an army build a pontoon bridge, and all the people walked across to safety. Then he radioed headquarters for help. They sent bombers, and they blew up the bridge when Pharaoh and his soldiers were crossing, and all the Israelites were saved. Now, Joey, is that really what your Sunday school teacher taught you? His mother asked. Well, no, Mom, but if I told it the way the teacher did, you'd never believe it. I agree with little Joey that when the biblical story of Moses is understood literally, many people don't believe it. But when studied metaphysically for its real meaning, it is 100% valid. It's about your freedom to overcome obstacles to your promised land. So listen carefully to the real story. Listen to the little details now and think about what each character and each place represents in your consciousness. Who is your inner Pharaoh? Who is your inner Moses? Who are the chosen ones in you? What's the promised land? What's Egypt in you? What is the parting of the Red Sea? What does that mean in your life? So listen carefully and think about that. In ancient Egypt, the enslaved Hebrew people, you remember, the chosen ones, prayed to God to be saved. Fearing the Hebrews' growing power in Egypt, Pharaoh ordered a mass killing of the Hebrew babies. Afraid for her newborn son's safety, Yocheved and her two other children, Miriam and Aaron, rushed to the Nile River, where she placed her baby in the basket and hoped that he would float to safety somewhere. The basket did. It floated to Pharaoh's palace, where the baby was found and adopted by Pharaoh's wife. Some stories say his daughter, but we're not going to worry about that. She named him Moses, and Moses thus grew up to be an Egyptian prince with his brother Ramses. Years later, Moses and his adoptive brother, Prince Ramses, were scolded because they accidentally destroyed a temple during one of their many chariot races. They were a kind of wild team. Moses defended his brother Ramses, who was very grateful and saw to it that Moses was given a position of power in Egypt. Later, Moses left the palace one day and saw the now adult Miriam, his sister, whom he, of course, didn't recognize because he had left her when he was a baby. Moses didn't believe Miriam when she told him who he really was, a Hebrew, just like all the other Hebrew slaves in Egypt. Miriam then sang their childhood lullaby, their mother's lullaby, which triggered Moses' memory. He thus realized that the Hebrew slaves in Egypt were really his people. The next day, Moses tried to stop an Egyptian slave driver from beating an elderly Hebrew slave, and Moses pushed the guard to his death. Horrified, scared, and ashamed, Moses left Egypt. Years later, God told Moses to return to Egypt and lead the Hebrew slaves to freedom. Pharaoh refused Moses' request, so Moses and God caused terrible things to happen to the Egyptians, among them various plagues and the death of Pharaoh's baby son. Grief-stricken, Pharaoh finally gave the Hebrews permission to leave Egypt and stop their sorcery. The following morning, Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt, but when they arrived to the Red Sea, they discovered that the vengeful Pharaoh had followed them with his army. To save his people, Moses commanded the sea to part so the Hebrews could cross safely, which they did. But when the Hebrew army followed them, the sea crossed over again and drowned all the Egyptian soldiers. After years of wandering and hardship, Moses finally led the chosen ones up to the place where they would eventually enter the promised land. So, in the Moses story, Pharaoh symbolizes the part of you which thinks that power, material things, and worldly pursuits are what's really important. Your inner Pharaoh, your ego, thinks the physical world is all there is to life. Don't we sometimes fall into that trap? Pharaoh, our ego, rules over and enslaves our chosen ones, our higher self. And we all are victims of that because society and the outer world just constantly is barraging us with influences of that kind, Pharaoh influences. The Pharaoh part of you might have the tendency to believe that the Kardashians' lifestyle is the ultimate success in life. I've got students who I really think believe that. Your inner Pharaoh might think that sketchy business deals, lying about a product you sell, or selling drugs or cigarettes or other dangerous products is okay. You work for a firm that does that. Okay, that's the way you make money. The Pharaoh part of you might think that taking bribes or kickbacks or lying to your clients is okay. One of the Buddhist main precepts in the Eightfold Path is right livelihood. This means don't sell alcohol, cigarettes, meat, or anything that would cause harm to a living being. Our Pharaoh self doesn't care if there's money and power to be gained from taking advantage of and cheating others. Maybe selling cigarettes to the Chinese. I'm just trying to give you some concrete examples here. You must let your conscience, of course, be your guide in terms of the specifics in your life. The commandment of do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a pretty good general guidepost. And in terms of gaining our freedom, we often have to do actual battle against our inner Pharaoh, which the Bhagavad Gita talks a lot about. Our ego is out for power and material gain, regardless of the effects on others, because our ego doesn't accept that those others are part of us and that we are all one, and that what we do to the least of these, we do to God. Our ego isn't aware or maybe doesn't care about the chaos, suffering, and pain we cause ourselves and others. The ego thinks we are separate from other beings. Freedom, however, is understanding that we are all one, and that what we do to others, we really do to ourselves. We thus owe it to ourselves to not to cause harm to others, because whatever we do is like a boomerang. It comes right back to us. Instant karma. It's just the way it is. Your chosen ones are the parts of you that have chosen a higher path. It's your higher self, your Christ self, like Katrina was talking about last week. Let your Christ self, your higher self, be in control. It frees you. The chosen ones are the parts of you that have chosen to live by higher values than just material concerns and power. There's nothing wrong with material things or creature comforts, but to think that the material level of life is all there is to cheat yourself out of all but the material level of life. You'll be losing out on a lot. The chosen ones see above and beyond just the material world. God commanded Moses to free the chosen ones from Pharaoh in Egypt. Metaphysically, Egypt represents the material world, the strictly material world. Our inner Moses, our committed inner self, thus frees our chosen ones, our Christ self, from the belief that materialism, the materialism that Egypt represents, is all there is. Result, we are then free to go to the promised land. The promised land is that state of consciousness where you can really enjoy the fullness of life, real happiness, because you are living the eternal wisdom and laws of the universe. These laws or guides in simplified terms can be seen in such things as the Ten Commandments, the Buddhist Eightfold Path, the Way of the Tao, and in many fairy tales, myths, and biblical stories, if properly understood. And thanks to Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, famed psychiatrist Carl Jung, and modern myth guru Professor Joseph Campbell, we can now decipher these stories. Only secret societies and esoteric groups like the Egyptian mystery schools used to be able to understand these things. They were the only ones that had the information. Now we all do. So, number one in gaining freedom for yourself is freeing yourself from your lower self, which are the limiting levels of life. Your Egypt and your Pharaoh, or ego, worldly values that many people have embraced as the only reality. That's all they know. How little is their world. When your chosen ones, your Christ self, are given the freedom to operate your life and guide you, you will notice that you are manifesting integrity, honesty, love, forgiveness, and the golden rule in all circumstances with all beings at all times, which results in your happiness and peace because there's so little chaos in your life. Not letting your true self or your Christ self operate your life ends up causing a lot of suffering and chaos and fear and a sense of lack because you judge, condemn, and don't forgive others. And the problem is this causes you psychologically to do the same to yourself, because whatever you think of others, your subconscious believes, oh, you're capable of this too. So it's for your own good. Now, our inner Moses, our Christ self, sometimes has to struggle, right? It's not all easy to make changes in consciousness. It might have to wage battle against our inner Pharaoh, as in the story. No one said arriving at the promised land was totally easy. It took the chosen ones 40 years. That is a symbol to us that sometimes there's a time lapse and a little struggle between the time we understand and commit and the time we really totally get there. There are challenges, tests, growth. Many of the chosen ones, remember, were reluctant to leave Egypt in the first place. They'd gotten used to a materialistic society, and they didn't want to leave the known for the unknown. Few of us do well with change, even if it's for the better. We get used to the same old thing. We get used to the same old sandbox. We don't think out of that box because change is sometimes hard. Maybe it means changing jobs or friends or places or acting in new ways. This week I was teaching Vacation Bible School class, and I asked any of the teenagers if they found choosing the promised land, leaving their inner Egypt, to be a little hard. And one of the 16-year-old boys raised his hand and said, "Yes, it's hard. I had to leave my friends. They weren't good for me." 16 years old, he had already gotten that. He's thinking out of the worldly box. He's not going to go through life playing in the same old sandbox, I would predict. I'd like to share a poem that I read in the Wednesday service last week. It's called "My Sandbox." Today I have left my old sandbox behind. I had played quite happily in it, thinking that was all there was to life. I met friends with whom I played the game of pretense. I had really quite enjoyed myself in my old sandbox. But today I decided to leave for the sole reason that I had outgrown playing in that sandbox. And that's what I'm talking about today, gaining freedom from our spiritual childhood sandbox. It's time. You deserve it. We've outgrown it. It's time to apply the unity principles and live a higher life, one that does not consider the physical world, our Egypt, all there is to life. A commitment to higher values leads us out of our old sandbox to our promised land of joy and peace and abundance and tranquility, because we avoid a lot of the stress and chaos and suffering that we create for ourselves and our loved ones when we stay operating in that old sandbox, that old operating system. And while we're on the subject of freeing ourselves from such old programming as judging and not being compassionate and understanding toward others, all of those others being God's children, remember above all that you too are a child of God. You must love and forgive and be compassionate toward yourself. Don't beat yourself up for everything you've done and maybe still do sometimes. Maybe you hear yourself gossiping at work or being passive-aggressive toward your neighbor or your brother. Just look at what's going on, take the information in, own up to it, ask God for forgiveness, commit to not do it again, and just use the information to grow. Just observe. Life is a school to learn and to grow in. It's not purgatory. You owe it to the world to love and understand and be compassionate toward yourself. It helps you learn to pass that on to others. It helps you be a role model to others, to love yourself. Give yourself right now, everybody in here, give yourself a great big hug. Come on, everybody. Sometimes you just don't do that enough. Come on, some of you are not doing it, okay? You're going to get a D. I won't fail you, but come on, hug yourself. You are so lovable. You've got to love yourself. You are one of God's children too, and you can model that to others. Related to forgiving and loving yourself is not living in the past. We hang on to past mistakes and past regrets. Again, look at the past, glean what lesson you can from it, and let it go. The present is all there really is. It reminds me of the joke about the Sunday school teacher who was telling her students the Bible story about Lot's wife. You remember? She looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. Little Johnny interrupted and said, "My mommy looked back once while she was driving and she turned into a telephone pole." The meaning of that story is pretty clear. The present is all that matters. The past is done. The future doesn't exist yet. Our present consciousness is all there is. If you must dwell in the past, ask God to help you see that past differently, with Christ's vision. You were probably doing the best you could at the time, and everyone else was too. Looking back can sometimes give us helpful information. We all know that, certainly those of us who've been in therapy, that can help us go forward in a healthier way. It can give us insight into why we are triggered to react in certain ways when people do or say certain things. But to dwell on the past can lead us into bumping into a lot of telephone poles in life, which you don't deserve to do. Again, if something you did in the past makes you feel bad, look at it, own up to it. It's okay. There's nothing wrong. You're a human being. We've all made mistakes. Ask God for forgiveness and commit to never doing it again. If possible, make reparations. End of story. Start your life anew. You are free. You can do it. You aren't now that maybe 4-year-old who was traumatized by your dysfunctional family, which incidentally 98% of families are. Did you know that? 98% of people had dysfunctional families. You now have the experience and the tools to deal with everything. And remember that one of the tools that enables smooth sailing and freedom from chaos is the present, is to observe the eternal laws. It is a gift to do that. The eternal laws are kind of like traffic laws. Stopping at red lights and observing speed zones helps everybody get to their destination and avoid tragedy, right? They're not bad things. They're to help. That's what the eternal laws are. There was a gracious lady who was mailing an old family Bible to her brother. "Is there anything breakable in here, ma'am?" asked the postal clerk. "Only the 10 Commandments," answered the lady. If you want to gain freedom from some of the stress, chaos, and suffering that life seems to bring, I repeat, follow the 10 Commandments, the Buddhist Eightfold Path of right aim, right concentration, right livelihood, etc. These kinds of expressions of the eternal laws pave the road to our freedom from chaos and suffering that breaking these laws can cause, and I'm sure we all can attest to that. Simple cause and effect, karma. These eternal laws are tools which help us have a better present and not repeat mistakes from the past. If you can't remember them, what do you remember? Anybody remember what was just said? If you can't remember all these Eightfold Path and 10 Commandments and the Tao way, just do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Very simple. These tools can help lead you to the promised land of peace, love, and joy. So, in closing, just remember, number 1, let your inner Moses, your higher self, free you from your inner Egypt and your inner Pharaoh, which is your materialistic ego belief that the material world is all there is. Allow your inner Moses to lead your chosen ones, your Christ self, to your promised land, the state of happiness, tranquility, and prosperity of all kinds, things you cannot even imagine now if you live on that wavelength. Number 2, don't live in the past. Especially don't judge yourself about the past. Look at what you did or said or who you were. Ask God for forgiveness. Learn from the lesson. Commit to a higher path. And never look back so you don't turn into a pillar of salt. Don't judge yourself unmercifully if you aren't perfect all the time. Remember, life is a school just learn the lessons and take the tests and go on. Sometimes we miss a problem. It's okay. Teacher corrects it. Next time, maybe we don't miss it. It's all right. And third, live by the eternal laws of goodness, kindness, integrity, purity, and love toward yourself. Don't forget that. Toward yourself and others. When you abide by the eternal wisdom and laws, you are able to part the Red Seas of your life because you live in harmony with these higher laws. These higher laws exist. Bottom line, think out of your old sandbox. Ask God to help you see things differently with your Christ vision. It's all in divine order. It might not be the order you think you want, but with Christ's vision, you will begin to see the way it really is, the myriad opportunities and lessons that the school of life offers. It's fun. Learning is fun. And above all, remember that upgrading your spiritual operating system is not the absence of struggles, but it does offer the freedom to choose the spiritual way, and that will make all the difference for yourself and your loved ones, for everyone around you. Ernest Hemingway once said, "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are strong at the broken places." I would add that the reason the world sometimes breaks us, which isn't really necessary but almost always true, is because we go through life in the wrong state of consciousness. But we can still grow stronger by the lessons learned. And we can always change our consciousness and see the world differently and thus avoid future chaos. You are always free to be in the world, but not of it. Live this truth, and the truth will set you free. And remember, these spiritual truths and the unity principles are not for our information. They're not for our information. They are for our transformation. Our transformation. And so be it.